Today we're here at Aalto University in Finland, and this is Professor Esa Saarinen. And the reason we're talking here today is that Esa has a series called Magnificent Life, which we could consider a Studium Generale series and an open lecture series. And when I watched some of the lectures, I was very impressed on how Esa, in a no-nonsense language and with a lot of warmth, explained some often deep principles, either of psychology or of living. And today we're together going to explore some of these concepts and relate them to certain things we also do back home at Red University.
Beautiful. That's an uplifting introduction, Joseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great. Well, Esa, I wanted to start with your Magnificent Life series. At the beginning, you invite the audience to go into tender and dynamic moments of meeting. The idea of tenderness, why is that important for you?
Well, one way to approach that question is to just observe the fact that if you're a university person like I am, it's sort of obvious that there's tremendous emphasis on knowledge, and of course that's what we need in order to cope with life and its various challenges. In order to move forward, we need knowledge. But I started to think, why is it always knowledge? Why not, for instance, tenderness?
Right.
Because a human being has also the capabilities for tenderness and also for responding to tenderness. So I just initially, on an intellectual level, became interested in the theme of tenderness.
Right.
But at the same time, I gradually started to feel, and it was very much just a sense of the fact that if people engage in serious thinking, how they feel about other people there and then on the occasion where they engage in that thinking,
Right.
is highly relevant. So therefore I started to just think, would there be some easy ways of perhaps broadening the bandwidth with which people connect, and also the tone with which people connect. So this led to the idea that, well, why not just suggest, as the lecture is about to start, that people could perhaps meet one another, but not only meet in the conventional sense, but also to provide some warmth
Right.
in those people that you happen to be there with.
Right.
So that's what I then dubbed the tender and dynamic moment of meeting, because it is dynamic in the sense that it does create some effects.
And it has a very nice ring to it, tender and dynamic moments of meeting. So that's also appreciated. Very nice the way it sounds.
Yeah. It's I like the sound of words, and I like to almost like taste them in my mouth.
Right.
But it's almost like thinking about words and thinking about language as music, as something that can resonate.
Yes.
And with the Finnish language, of course, which is what I primarily work with, the Finnish language. I love the Finnish language. I mean, nothing wrong with the English language, but I'm a Finn. So the Finnish language has its tremendous creative possibilities of making up words and stuff like that. So in Finnish, hell dynaaminen kohtaaminen. I mean, it's sort of.
Yeah, but I can hear the ring.
It rhymes nice.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. Because what we notice at our university, some of our students experience a lot of stress. And we even notice with staff members the ideas of stress, burnout, and everything. And then some lecturers and coaches are starting with, for example, you enter a lecture and they say, oh, let's just sit down and breathe for a brief moment. Or they enter the lecture, you put a little jazz music, very quiet, so that students can cool down, and also we. And I've personally also noticed when you make that connection and take those first seconds with the group in a warm way, that then afterwards students more easily pay attention, feel safe to ask questions. Whereas another approach, where for example the professor comes in and students are noisy and loud and you kind of become, please do this, stop, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
And the tenderness gives the feeling of safety also.
I think what you described there is just absolutely fundamental. It's basically like tuning the instrument. It's when you see the violinist coming to play,
Right.
she or he just sort of makes the final adjustments to make sure that the instrument is tuned exactly right. So I think a human being needs that kind of tuning,
Right.
particularly if you want to reach out to the more subtle dimensions. And if it's a rather rough case, like in some cases, it could be the challenge just to address and look into some objectively definable content.
Right.
It could be that some orientational aspects related to a tuning could be bypassed, or at least they are not that relevant. But if you want to get the whole of what you are, the whole of what we are capable of, behind the effort there and then in that present moment that the workshop, that the lecture
Right.
presents, then I think we need to, as you say, settle down and distance ourselves to some of those distortions that are such a dominant aspect in our lives, distortions, and which means that we are also subconsciously orienting ourselves to potential distortions in whatever there's going to happen. So, which means that we are not likely to be that connected with our core self, whatever that might be.
Yes.
Some of those more emotional, more subjective dimensions, which at the same time are absolutely fundamental to connect with if we really want to transform ourselves in the context of the workshop, in the context of the lecture, for something better.
Right, right. What comes up is a discussion we have also at school. There's a term that some people use is called that some people are more sensitive than others, or they use the word high sensitive or hypersensitive. What for some colleagues, using that ability is partly a little bit closing themselves more this way to then be able to, for example, connect to a student who's being coached. I've personally experienced when I coach a student who may be very upset for whatever reason, it doesn't make any sense to start asking questions or explaining. It's best sit there, be with them, feel part of what's happening, and then there comes a moment when, oh yeah, now we can start talking and try solving. My question is, I also noticed that for some other people, or in their way of thinking, they say, yeah, but this feeling thing, that's not my thing, or I don't get there. I personally do not think it's not their thing, but I sometimes wonder how can they be made more open for that. Do you have
I think what you point there is very important. First of all, it's clear that some people are more accustomed to working with their more sensitive aspects, more emotionally intensive and other people-oriented dimensions and capabilities.
Right.
And also, it could be that somebody has constructed a theory of himself or herself to the effect that I'm such and such a person, that I'm not really into that kind of feeling thing, for instance.
Right,
So
right.
somebody might have a narrative as it were against the feeling thing, whatever that might mean.
Right, right.
But as you say, every human being feels emotions. Everybody has the affective, internal, tremendous structure that is operative at all times. So, from my point of view, it's absolutely vital to be, on the one hand, extremely respectful for the individuality of a given person. So if I have 500 persons in the lecture room, I want each person to start to feel safe
Right.
as himself or herself. So therefore, I don't want to give signals that would threaten that person as based on his or her particular narrative. And of course, I don't know what the narrative is. So therefore, I want to start a lecture, I want to start the workshop in such a way that my intention of non-threat is felt. And of course, it's not non-obvious as how to do it. It's also you need to be genuine
Right, right.
in your intention, because people do experience inauthenticity, I think.
Yes.
So particularly if they are physically present. So therefore, on the one hand, being tremendously respectful for the individual, while at the same time believing that in fact everybody wants to feel connected, wants to feel safe with those people he or she is there in the context of that workshop, in the context of that lecture,
Right.
is, I think, a orienting principle. But it's something that aims at opening people for their cognitive possibilities, for those lines of thought that might start to emerge.
Right.
If I didn't, as a participant, need to secure my back against possible attacks, for instance, by, let's say, unexpected questions from the lecturer, from the facilitator, which is something I never do. I never make any sudden questions to anybody,
Right.
because I want, and I make this explicit.
You use the
because I
term
want,
silent questions, which I also like, that word.
yeah,
silent questions, right?
yes, well,
Yes,
silent
I
question.
like it. I like the term that you use for that.
Yeah, it's I suppose reflection of the fact that I believe so much of the relevant dialogue
Yeah.
takes place within the person, but it's still a function of what he or she experiences from others, and especially, of course, from the one who is speaking. So if I'm giving a lecture, I'm the one who is speaking. So there is the internal dialogue, and there's a silent dialogue.
Yes, yes.
And,
yes.
and in the context of the silent dialogue, there's also silent questions that are somehow implicitly hidden there in whatever I'm delivering, but for that person become active partners
Yes.
in his or her internal dialogue, and if he or she feels secure, if he or she feels that I can actually go with this thought, it could be that it goes in a direction that is highly empowering and highly rewarding, because the person is from his or her experience picking up as the material that was always there, but didn't seem to serve his or her purpose in the current moment.
Right.
So the movement of thought that the situation makes possible, I think is the key point.
Yes.
It's sort of like thinking that people have unthought thoughts that they in fact would want to think through, and if they did think
It
that
would
through,
enrich.
yeah, that's right. So and for all that, the enabling factors are the ones that start to unfold right in the beginning already at the door from my point of view. I'm at the
Right.
door greeting everybody by hand each time because I want to get myself a sense of how the people are, each of them today.
Right.
But I also want to make the person feel my intention of trying to create something relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great, great. What I hear in what you're saying, in how I translate it to the way I look at things, is really this idea of humans, and maybe more than humans, not being really individuals. Of course, we have our own bodies and everything, but on a level of thinking and of generating thought and solutions, we're really a whole. Now, this is a view that some people hold, and sometimes in academia is forgotten. Then the view is, I give like a radio and you pick it up and do something with it. But I love how you clearly go from this fundamental view of, no, we're a combined something, and when we're together and we can spark each other, things may start popping up. And I make a bit of a reference to David Bohm. We do some classes where we do dialogue and we read
Great.
some of David Bohm's
Great.
view on the collective thought. For some students, it's hard to grasp when they read it, but when we go into it, and once in a while these moments happen, it's beautiful, and at the same time, I've experienced it as a continuing connection with, allowing something to flourish.
Well, a couple of things come to my mind on the basis of what you just now said.
Sure.
I mean, it's clear that if we think about ourselves as human beings, I think it's so obvious that there are all kinds of aspects to the overall system that relate to other people. Point number one. Point number two, we haven't really thought about. So it could be that we have formed an image of ourselves as relatively straightforward creatures, with envisioning ourselves as systems, the features of which we pretty much know.
Right.
And then of course we do know how we could strengthen the system in some ways. So if I gain a particular competence I don't now have, I'll be stronger. If I gain access, particular knowledge, again that happens. But it's still a view that I think is unrealistic. It's or even I would say false, because it's in the way we are constituted that we have all kinds of ways of connecting with others, and those ways of connecting with others, some of them are more rationally understandable and conceptually more easy to grasp than others. But why not take advantage of everything we have?
Right.
In the process of our growth, in the process of our trying to enrich each other's lives and our own lives. That, and therefore, from my point of view, the starting point is always us as whole human beings, with acknowledging the fact that you can't perhaps conceptualize some of the aspects that whatever that means, but that also means that if you meet somebody, like I'm meeting you just now, I mean, I know of you, I've read you, and we've met, and so forth. But of course, there are aspects to you that I can only sort of somehow feel. It's also your movement forward. You know, my feeling of you this time is that you have clearly moved from somewhere to somewhere else. So you seem, as it were, somehow more harmonious the last time. Not that I felt you disharmonious in any way.
But
I think it's sort of more Zen-like. But it's a movement forward. So to me, it's natural to start to ask, well, okay, if this is Joseph's movement forward, could I somehow perhaps contribute to this movement? Because it's a beautiful movement, and all this takes place as we are here talking. It's a human possibility that I think we should embrace. This possibility to enrich ourselves, and also as individuals ourselves. by being more what we actually are as whole systems.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What you just said with, I notice with students, the moment you go to a connection with them, rather than conceptualizing what you think might be the problem, what you think might be the solution, when you connect with them, there seems to be like a movement inside that says, wait until something happens that they will say, or you do say something, but then it has this feeling of being more right. Then when you rationally try to, from the conceptual model, there's a part of you that says, this is odd. I say something, it makes sense, but it doesn't feel as if that matches the moment. And I have to say I'm also a bit touched by what you previously said, so I'm also experiencing that, but I think educators can do that by really wanting to be with that other person and allowing that person safety. Now at our university, we go through a phase of change and change management. And also what we notice there, the moment colleagues, staff members feel there's a care behind the change, then things like resistance or whatever is diffused. But if there's not an essential start with care, and there's directly a way, yes, but we have 8 steps and you go through this one and that one, then you start creating a mess.
Yeah.
And it seems, Esa, that our natural way of being humans actually leads to a very, I wouldn't say simple, but a much simpler way of starting to solve problems than going into a very conceptual and 25 steps and all that. That creates tremendous new problems, seems to be creating.
I agree completely. I think what you now make here is a very, very deep point, and it's very much to the core of our times also, what you now articulate. And it also relates to the dominance of the explicit, so to say, and disrespect of those aspects that are indirect, that are hidden, and from my point of view, that means also that you at the same time start to disrespect the potential, because the potential is something that to some extent always is hidden. But in the dominant way of thinking and the dominant way of carrying out change programs, it's believed that you can, in some sense, from outside already in advance, sort of command the change, and then the map, in a sense, becomes the territory. Right. But of course, the territory is the point. So, and it's in the territory where the real human beings have to do whatever needs to be done, but are not likely to do the best way, given the fact that there's so much emphasis on the map. And it means, in particular, I think, in the context of students, the challenge of if you are a professor, if you are a teacher, to make a connection with the students, which is not based on, this is my view, which is not based on what you are assumed to be as an authority of a particular as the set of statements, but the institution in which the encounter takes place is of course one where you're supposed to be sort of like the high priest of particular statements.
Right.
So, and you know the statements, but I believe this over-orientation to life through statements is misguided. It's of course one aspect of life to know how something is and to state that something is like we know is it is, but in order for people to start to appreciate your potentially significant, important, truthful statements, there needs to be the connections to start with, and there how you feel care and cared for, and yourself as a creature capable of caring, I think is a prerequisite for that later cognitive, more explicit, objectival
Right.
processes to take place productively.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 It's if we look at students also, it's learning not to say, oh, these ones are the good ones and they in the top grades, and these are the lower grades and they'll end up there, but seeing with everybody what is their thing. I work for a hotel management school, and there are certain students who are great in creating coffees and serving and who have no ambition to become managers, and that's fantastic if that's their thing. And then there's others who say, I'd love to be at Hilton corporate level and do my thing. Fine, but one is not better than the other. As an institution, we may sometimes think and guide, oh yeah, but let's push them more in that direction. You can look at possibilities, but if you know the sparkle of the person is there, let him or her continue with that sparkle. And I think part of our job at universities is more and more to look, yes, but where do they want to flourish? Because the students also come, some with a clear idea what they want to do, but some have an idea from their parents, society, whatever, which is not theirs. And we can help them uncover and find that.
Yeah, if I think about, I mean, I'm 65 this summer, and I know so many people. I've seen so many people, and I've seen people in their careers, in their lives. Some of them raise spectacularly, and some of them come to a sort of plateau, or even in some sense, with respect to what the promise seemed to be. Not really to flourish, let's say, when you look at the situation in 20 years' time.
Right.
So to me, it's quite natural to ask, well, if it's the case, when I look at the past, that I really couldn't have predicted that well what somebody's path to flourishing turns out it was. I couldn't have predicted it. It's just astonishing. I mean, I look at the person with astonishment. But also, it seems in many cases that the tremendous talent that somebody had really didn't become put in beautiful use by the person, because everything was so easy for the person initially.
Right.
So he was an extrovert, very articulate, sharp, quick mind. Meant that in fact he could impress people pretty easily, but that meant that he didn't really put himself under strain to educate himself and to grow in respects that were less obvious.
Right.
And it could be that those less obvious aspects are precisely the ones that, when you look at the whole, are exciting. Because very often the most exciting creative possibilities come from the combination of something with something else. So I mean, you have the capability to, for instance, to touch as a human being. We have the possibility to touch, and it's one of our ways to relate to the world. But it took quite a long time for people to realize that, in fact, touch could be relevant when it comes to gadgets, technical equipments.
Yes, right.
So I mean, you had huge corporations that devoted everything they had to moving on the great breakthroughs with, let's say, technologies, who didn't realize that people actually touch.
Right.
And it's this possibility to connect something with something else within us that I think is the biggest source of something tremendous, something magnificent.
Right.
But the person might, as it were, downplay himself or herself, particularly if it's something that isn't at the current time that much appreciated.
Right.
If there are all kinds of customs in place that say that one couldn't do what you want to do, like in your case, I know that what you do in your workshops is that you make things physical, so to say.
Yeah.
But the themes regarding which you want to make things physical already exist conceptually. So therefore, the temptation is to think, hey, why not take the direct route and just look what leadership principles are relevant today. So cognitively speaking, but of course your approach is to make people live those principles and feel the principles through the physical essence. And it's just that this is something that in universities is not that usual.
Yes.
That makes you a radical in the productive sense of the word.
Right.
And it's obvious if we look at the future in, let's say, 50 years time. 50. I mean, can anybody believe that in 50 years time in the institutions of higher education, one wouldn't want to use everything that the student has as capabilities, as opposed to just a narrow part,
Absolutely.
which is the cognitive dimension. I mean, however impressive the cognitive dimension is, there are these other dimensions as well. Why not use them?
Absolutely.
So that's what I think what you are trying to do.
Yes.
And it's also something that I think is important to, as a more general tendency to observe as a possibility. And the possibility, I think, is that each human being has ingredients for something beautiful, the beauty of which comes when the something is connected with something else. But it could be that at the current time there isn't an obvious connection. And it could be that, on the contrary, that there is a disconnect, and perhaps also trumpets that sort of emphasize the fact that these shouldn't be connected. But if, in fact, the person could perhaps connect them.
Yes.
So like Ida in my team, when she first told me that she's interested in theater, I was extremely excited, because she was a bright student, tremendous student of industrial engineering. This is a crown jewel program of our university. This is the most difficult program to get into. And she's saying, I'm interested in theater. I thought, this is dynamite. Because there's this possibility for the connection.
Yes.
There's something unique, something exciting, and something that does justice to this particular person.
Right.
And through her to the wider world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your Ida example reminds me of a student. I forgot his name. It was like 7 years ago. He came to an assessment with us, and he was very apologetic. And then he said, I come from a family. My dad is a doctor. My brother is a doctor. My other brother is a banker. And I want to open my own restaurant. But he said it as if it was a sin. But as we asked him a few more questions, and what kind of restaurant and why, and he was saying, I want to do this and I want to create that, and it wants to be the south of France. You could see him opening with this. So we said, well, fantastic, you should come to our school. And I made a joke. I said, well, I guess your doctor father must eat. And he said, yeah. And he probably enjoys going to restaurants, right? So there must be good cooks like you. So but what I pick up from this is that for him, and he graduated from our school, so he had to start realizing that what his inner drive was perfectly fine and on the same level with anybody else's drive. He didn't have to believe in this hierarchy which society or he had integrated. And I would say the same with leadership tango. I feel especially this year I'm going with it because my mind also says, yeah, go with this. When I first started it at our university, I was almost shyly doing it in a room with some students and music, and when my colleagues asked me, what are you doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm doing some movements. But then I said, no, let's not hide under a stone. Let's do this and back it up, Howard Gardner's theories and other neurological studies on connection. So you have the science there. But then just go with the thing. And like with Ida in theater, it has to be followed.
I think very often it's the case on the individual level, but also on a broader scale, that it's important to at the initial stages to create the relevant kind of James Bond smoke cover to what you are sort of doing.
Right.
Because it could be that there are all kinds of conventions that look with suspicion whatever you are doing, and it could be it's syntactic. It's sort of like any word from let's say music or from cultural world beyond the empathetically cognitive dimension, like tango, can't be used in connection of leadership in a given higher education institution.
Right.
But once you start to do it, if you manage to do it and get it going, it could be that it, as it were, proves itself in practice.
Exactly.
So like when I started here in Aalto University, there wasn't any Aalto University. It was Helsinki University of Technology, so it's an engineering school. And I wanted to do lectures my style so that they would be relevant to everybody that would come. But it was an engineering school. So I discussed with my great colleague Raimo Hämäläinen, with whom we then created the systems intelligence concept. What should I call the course? And Raimo said, I think you should call it, let's say, philosophy and systems thinking. Because this is an engineering school, so systems thinking, you are doing systems thinking. Basically, anybody is doing systems thinking if you are thinking about some whole. But for engineers,
Yeah.
it sounds like that's acceptable.
Right.
So even if there is philosophy adjoining the systems thinking, it's okay. So
right.
it's not that bad maybe. I mean, he's a philosopher anyway.
Right.
So I think that was the relevant kind of James Bond smoke cover for the effort. But then if it starts to work, if people start to experience something that they from within observe as relevant, as significant, that practical momentum, even if you don't have the conceptual justification fully in place,
Right.
might be enough. And I would say in most interesting cases this is the case, because there's no particular reason to believe that for everything that is exciting you have the term ready before you start it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And or to pick up from your cook example, 30 years ago I would say there wasn't one single star chef in the whole of Finland. I mean, there were some well-known restaurants. Some of them were more appreciated than some others, but there were some star restaurants that
Right.
Most expensive and so forth kind of places. But cooks were not stars. But of course now there are dozens of star chefs. And of course the fact that there are dozens of star chefs means that somebody has broken the ground for that.
Yes.
And somebody has followed his or her passion
Right.
to do it, and then the time has picked up on the momentum, and there has become this kind of resonance,
Yes.
let's say with TV programs and stuff like that, giving momentum to it.
Right.
But I think it's always so essential, on the one hand, to find your passion, at the same time realize it could be that some projections of the passion might be in discrepancy with something that happens to be the case right now, so there might be some need to be systems intelligent and sort of tune down some aspects as opposed to some other aspects in what you are trying to do, because it could be that you are crushed too early if you come with full force out with what you are trying to do.
Exactly. I'd like to pick up on this thought and then maybe do a short break after that. When I hear you say systems intelligence, I connected to something I read. The lady's called Barbara Boreszka. She's a Polish-Dutch lady, writes books that are new psychological, you could sometimes even say new agey, but I don't want to give it a label. But she was also writing somewhere in a chapter saying, when you follow your passion, also follow the bigger flow and the bigger picture. So don't push it. It's different from, that also happened to me where, for example, some people said, oh, leadership tango, get the name protected, write a business plan, roll it out. And I immediately start feeling they're going to kill my baby. I'd rather let it grow naturally, and it will do its thing if it follows the movement. And if it follows, or as you say, systems intelligence, then there's also a much more harmonious growth. Then if you push, then there's pushing back, and it's a much more complicated way of, and probably not such an intelligent way of getting things done. So I guess I hear when you say systems intelligence, it's also a sense of feeling and trust that there is something that carries passion along. As long as you're clever enough to notice, do the rest of the factors fit?
That's right. I mean, this is, well, let me say it this way. It's of course natural for a human being or any active agent to envision himself, herself in separation of everything else. But de facto, of course, everything is connected.
Right.
So therefore, it's sort of, intellectually speaking, trivially true that whatever you from within try to bring out can resonate better or worse with whatever is outside. So it would seem not very intelligent to disrespect this fact.
Yes.
And I think it really is a fact. It's and it of course doesn't mean that all kinds of strange aspects of your environment or people's attitudes and customs, whatever, would be justified. It's of course not.
No.
It's just that it's wise to be wise.
Yes.
And it means that you take into account the context, the environment, the overall system in which you are trying to do something, so that you are not crushed in that beautiful thing that you are trying to do. But at the same time, I think it's also important to recognize the fact that whatever the system outside seems to be, the overall system, customs, practices, rules, probably is not as you believe it is. Probably there is more room to maneuver than you believe is the case.
Yeah.
So this is the principle I sometimes refer to on the individual human level as the principle that there's always something good that is hiding in each of us. So which I believe is really a fact. It's not a philosophy in my view.
Sure,
but that's
no,
maybe
it's a
something we could return to.
Yes, wonderful. Esa, so in your lecture series, the first one, the X Factor, you mentioned there's more to us than meets the eye, and about the good that's out there. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that suggestion, because that's something that is very important to me, to recognize as a fact what it means to be a human being. It's just like if you're a human being, you have a body. So it's not a sort of philosophy. It's not a vision. It's not really a statement either. It's just a fact that there are all kinds of ingredients in us, seeds that point beyond what there now is to be seen. But it could be that there's something is something quite beautiful if brought to flourishing.
Right.
But at the same time, given the fact that we are naturally inclined to base our actions and our orientation on what we believe is the case, it could be that we are systematically misled
Yes.
by what the other person actually is with respect to the future. And therefore it could be that we don't approach the person with the kind of warmth we would approach the person if we did see those hidden beautiful ingredients. Now, while that is the case, that we might be systematically misled and therefore also the downplaying what we are potentially from the point of view of the encounter situation. There of course is the possibility that maybe I could bring something to the situation that could trigger to something beautiful that is hiding
Yes.
in the people or people at large with whom you are dealing with. And if you do that wisely, if you do that with sensitivity, as opposed to harshly, roughly, and so forth, which is how you should act anyway.
Yes.
Maybe something start to unfold. To me, this is something that was really brought home. Not far from where we are here. It's just a couple of 100 meters over there, where there was a murder attempt on me.
Right.
Yeah, and this was 2014. And it was, well, it was in many ways quite, of course, an experience. But to me, it brought home the point that, there's so much good in people that you don't ordinarily recognize. And I'm a pretty well-known person here in Finland, so I mean, people were really shocked, and the big news and everything when they learned about the of the incident. But that meant, from my point of view, that people expressed their compassion with a magnitude I just couldn't have predicted in my dreams. It's just astonishing how much hidden compassion there is in people, and it's this beauty of the hidden compassion, which I think is just one indication of the kind of dimensions that might become systematically hidden in our everyday, and on which I think we should aim to tap.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What was quite touching when I heard you explain what had happened to you, and I remember in the video you even said you were carried with the ambulance and the sirens were on, and it was like an aesthetic moment.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've done work with the Finnish fire brigade already in the 90s, and I admire that profession tremendously. So when the ambulance people came, it was sort of uplifting, and it's just that professionalism, the sort of being in the midst of that system in place. It's the tremendous system the society has built.
Exactly.
It's really amazing. But then when we left, aesthetically speaking, when the ambulance guys put the sirens on, I must say I was impressed. I thought it was great.
Yes.
As opposed to not putting the sirens on. I mean, you don't become the target of a murder attempt that often. And I hope.
Yes, exactly.
And it's so that one occasion it does happen. I think it's great to have the sirens.
Yes, and what it triggered with me also is there's a difference between positive thinking as a sort of manipulative way of going and genuinely realizing, as you also said, life is good, there's goodness out there, and suddenly I'm open to start recognizing this. The reason, and again, your lecture had such an impact on me that when I personally notice I go into what you call surface defect thinking. A little example is I had to give a training to some people, and somebody then told me or warned me saying, one of the people doesn't want you to be doing this because he thinks you're such and such. My first reaction was, but then I realized, wait a minute, I cannot go work with this person if I keep this voice, but it's there. So I even remember almost praying to myself saying, let some other thought come up. This is not useful. A few weeks later, I was bicycling and I had this image of that person who I'd never seen him when he was 5, but I had an image of a 5-year-old. And then I said, he was a 5-year-old, I was a 5-year-old. We grew, and we're here today because that's how we develop. And then I immediately, in my heart, I felt like, great, we're just people, and then when I met him for the training, that other thought was gone. It was just a 5, And I remember after the training, he was the one coming to say thank you and all this. But I also felt thank you and thank you, Esa, because I think as humans, it's important to be watchful on how our mind, if we're not watchful, it tells us all sorts of huge nonsense. And very often it's scary negative nonsense, whereas the other side goes to much more possibility and beauty. And you may even appreciate the fact that you just got stabbed, which is not necessarily pleasant, but you may appreciate and say, well, I got stabbed, but let's make the best out of the moment of whatever that is, in a natural sense, not in a I have to now.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to conceptualize the situation, because positivity often is thought of as something that in some sense isn't really real.
Exactly.
But of course you can say, well, how about the fact that any human being can be interested? So being curious. So if you are interested into something, you experience something that surely can describe as something positive. It's pleasant feeling from within to be interested.
Yes.
But of course, people generally think that, but most things are not interesting. Yeah, but maybe you could direct yourself
exactly.
to becoming interested, to be interested, and therefore to generate positivity through being interested within yourself. But of course, if you are interested in a human being's endeavors and activities and concerns, people typically experience that as positive, because if it's something important to them, they attach something that is, generally speaking, positive to what the theme it is. Like I have twins.
Yes.
So if somebody approaches me and says, Esa, how old are your twins today? And he or she opens the theme of twins, but it's not a neutral theme for me. It's so showing interest to my twins, as it were, hits my plus button, and it's this kind of possibility to, as the play, the instrument we have as creatures that are capable of feeling something as positive in the realms of interest, in the realm of curiosity, respect, excitement, joy. I mean, why not take use of that?
Absolutely.
And also that in connection of the more cognitively dominant activities that we are also capable of doing, but we are capable of doing those better if we activate the emotional dimension to support the effort, and all that I think is so fundamentally connected to other people and to the attunement we have with other people. But that again is something we can, at least to some extent, gear or lead to a direction where it perhaps automatically wouldn't go if we didn't pay mindful attention to the possibilities and to what we actually are. Because easily it could be in spontaneous situations that we feel from within somebody as negative.
Yes.
And of course, in most cases, it really is, to be honest, in most cases it is because the person's way of dressing is, from our point of view, not that aesthetic or whatever, stupid in some ways, way of talking, facial expression. There are all kinds of, if you really think about it, rather superficial reasons and surface-related reasons for your negative impression. And at the same time, whatever the person is, of course, also for the potential negativity, there is a reason for that, but maybe you could be a reason for the more positive aspects of the other person to start to lighten up.
Exactly.
And it really is, I think, astonishing in many cases, just if you project to the other person acknowledgement of his or her worth. So acknowledging that he or she is, from your point of view, a worthy human being. So it's in some sense it's trivially true.
It's true.
Yeah. But you might not do that instinctively. It might be that you don't communicate that with your subconscious. messaging. But of course you could do that better if you had tuned up with yourself, in your core self, regarding how do you perceive other people. And that again, of course, is something that requires reflection. It requires that you don't get immersed in the immediate operative tasks and benefits that a consumer society offers us. Which I think is a grand, huge, tremendous challenge for each of us. The tasks and the sort of goodies, as opposed to deeper reflection.
Right, right. And safeguarding, as you say in one of your lectures, if you have your smartphone, and if every free moment you could go and roam around the trees and just reflect, or you could be busy with what keeps you busy. But that doesn't give you the chance sometimes to go too deeper and say, hey, wait a minute, where do I steer myself?
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, if you think about, let's say, these leaves in this maple tree, these trees were not here 10 days ago. I mean, you didn't see anything at all here 10 days ago in terms of leaves.
Right.
Now, I mean, just 2 days ago, the leaves were not this size. Also, given the fact that the summer in Finland is pretty short, the nature, when it comes out, it really bursts out. I mean, it explodes. Meaning that the green is a particular kind of green. It's sort of radiant green, but it's also gentle in some sense. It's not an aggressive green, the radiant green. Now, if you say, well, how many people look at, let's say, these leaves when they pass this area, as opposed to their smartphones? It's the score is pretty high for the smartphones. But if you say, is the smartphone really actually more interesting? Has it more to offer than if you looked at that leaf for, let's say, 15 seconds? So it's just that we pass the abundance.
Yes, we pass the abundance.
That the world, in fact, as a territory, provides us.
Wow.
Because the maps are so attractive in some sense on other levels, and also the way we interact with one another supports that attraction to something that really doesn't carry that far.
No, and what I also hear you saying is that we have a tremendous responsibility to take good care of our minds and to see where our mind wanders and where we take it. I know sometimes in a more new agey field, people talk about a law of attraction. But I have to admit, I experience as a fact the fact that if my mind goes to appreciative, generative, seeing possibilities, I will start seeing possibilities. People start seeing possibilities. If they're not wishing to do this, if they want to focus on what doesn't work or what's complicated, they'll especially see that. And then of course they'll say, yeah, the world is complicated and difficult. I have proof, I've seen it. Because you were only looking at that. And I notice that at our university, we sometimes have a tendency now to tell students you need 21st century skills. But what we sometimes do, some of it right, some of it wrong, is we then say there's 25 more items you need to be good at to be able to function today. Rather than saying, maybe we should drop a few items so there's open free time for you to be quiet and have a chance to look at what's already there.
Yeah, that's
rather than more needs to be put in.
I think that's very much to the core. There's tremendous tendency also of educational institutions to make the student feel that it's basically a task list.
Right.
And then various institutions, as they claim that they have the best task list for the 21st century, or whatever the catchword could be. but it's also it's this orientation through the task list, through which such themes as competence, skills come out, which is of course fine to a certain extent, but of course as human beings we are more, and also there is this dimension of what I say the operative system, as opposed to the applications and various programs that you perhaps download to work on that operative system. But the operative system needs care, it needs facilitation, it needs renewal, and it's the most astonishing aspect of us, and that's the whole of us.
Absolutely.
But the whole of us is so difficult to approach from the point of view of the kind of objectival thought and objectival practices which have crept into the university institutions as well, as opposed to what it used to be. I often say, and I'm so grateful that I have this opportunity to be kind of a, what I say, 19th century professor. So I don't really know how the system works, and there are all kinds of structures I don't really know about, I realize that there needs to be structures in place when you have a huge complicated thing like a university, but the cost could be that you don't pay sufficient attention to those aspects that always were behind the university effort, which is understanding, its wisdom, it's the significant, the meaningful, connecting with humanity and life at large, which can't be brought to reduced categories. But the reduced categories easily take over. That's something I try to fight against.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was a great conversation.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Joseph.